We're here to talk about War Remains, which hopefully some of you have seen it. It's a VR experience that transports viewers to the front lines of the Western Front in the First World War. And I, first of all, just kind of want to introduce some of the people who are involved in it. It was created by Madison Wells Media and Ethan Stearns back here taking pictures. Hi, Ethan.
Hi, Ethan.
So Madison Wells, incredible group. They like to bring creative storytellers together to make impressive, incredible, interactive entertainment, create, produce, and distribute. Also involved is Flight School Studio, and that's me. I'm executive producer at Flight School. My name's Taylor. It was directed by Brandon Oldenburg. He's our CCO, produced by head of production Jen Caddick. We're a studio based in Dallas. We've done a lot of VR work and AR work. We just launched a game on Switch a couple of weeks ago with Madison Wells called Creature in the Well. Did a project called Manifest 99. It was an Emmy-nominated VR project. So we've done a lot of IP as well as branded work, including the Oculus VR for Good program. And then with me is Mac. Mac, you want to kind of introduce yourself and your team?
Sure. My name is Mac Smith, and I work at Skywalker Sound here in the Bay Area, about 45 minutes north in West Marin. And I've worked there as a project employee for about 19 years now. I worked on all kinds of projects from like Toy Story 3, Tron Legacy, Rango. I was a sound effects recordist on Avengers Endgame. Also work on documentaries, a couple of theme park experiences. But coming to VR was brand new for me because I come from the world of cinematic sound design, really linear storytelling. So this was a completely new thing for me. And I definitely learned a lot from the experience. I was not the only one part of the team at Skywalker. My co-supervising sound editor was Bill Rudolph, a very talented sound designer who comes more from the video game and VR experience. He was involved with Carnegie Arena, among other things. Mike Brinkman was the technical sound designer, so he was really the implementer of all the sounds, and he also created material. Steve Morris, our head of engineering at Skywalker, is a mad genius and have to give credit to him. And then Damian Kaspauer, who's here, came out for a couple weeks at the start and helped us get the experience stood up, and is such a great spirit and encouraging, especially someone like me who doesn't come from the VR world. So that's kind of my team there. And then I want to talk about Dan Carlin, who's in the center of that picture there. Dan is known most of all for this incredibly popular podcast called Hardcore History. If you haven't heard it, it's amazing. He's got this knowledge and enthusiasm for history that I've never seen before. One of his most famous podcasts is called The Blueprint for Armageddon, which is a 6-part, 23-hour-long series just about World War I. You think, like, how could I sit through 23 hours? It's incredible. Like, I mean, how do you tackle a subject like World War I, in the first place? And he finds an amazing way to get, a macro perspective and a micro perspective and talking about big picture things and then dialing way down into like a single person's experience. So Dan was the one who really thought of this project, and he wanted to figure out, like, how could you take somebody and have them walk a mile in the moccasins of like a soldier in World War I. He was thinking, you could do a TV show or you could do a movie or a video game, but what's something that you could do that you could really immerse somebody in by making them feel like they're a soldier in a trench in the Western Front of the First World War? And like, how can you really make them feel like they're there and fool their brain? He kept referring to, like, I want to tap into people's lizard brain, and VR seemed like the best way to do it. So it's like, a way to put people in this situation that previously was like unimaginable that they could experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that's really interesting about Dan and his approach to content like this is that he is fascinated by extreme situations, and not for the stats of it or for the just the insanity of it, but for the humanity in that situation, and how do people respond when they're put in these crazy places. And that's really what the jumping off point of this experience was, is we don't want to create an experience that's telling you a bunch of facts about World War I. We want to just drop you into it, and we want to give you a chance to see what it's like, to feel it, to experience it viscerally instead of removed and separated and kind of intellectually. And so, one of the things that's really important about this experience, and we'll talk about this a lot, is that there's a major physical component to the experience. Everything that you're seeing digitally is recreated with a high degree of detail physically. And so one of the first challenges that we had is, how do you introduce somebody to that concept? How do you tease it? How do you put together a trailer for something that relies so heavily on the physical? And so the way that Dan wanted to approach that is, let's lean into the history and the authenticity that's going into everything that we're doing. So he put together this trailer. We put together this trailer where Dan Carlin, who you'll hear here, is reading a letter from a soldier in the First World War that he was actually writing home to his daughter Marjorie at Christmas in 1916. And I'll let this play.
My dear little Marjorie, I've only just received your little letter, which Mama sent with hers on November 19th. Do you remember that you asked me to be home for Christmas? I only wish I could. But there are many more soldiers in our battery who are more entitled to the Christmas leave than I am. So I'm afraid you will have to do without Daddy this Christmas. Santa Claus will come as usual. Daddy is as comfortable as possible. I expect even you would get tired enough to go soundly sleep in this dugout. It would be a change from your pink bedroom. Right again soon, dear. Heaps of love and kisses from your ever-loving Daddy.
So the soldier who was writing that, Gunner Wilfred Cove, died in 1917, and that letter was found in his pocket. And we don't mention it overtly in that trailer in the experience anywhere, but it's this kind of subtle subtext that's, I think, woven into the trailer, and you get a sense of it anyway. And a lot of that, I think, comes down to the sound design. You want to talk about how you approached that and some of the thoughts that went into it?
Sure. Bill Rudolph gets all the credit for the sound in the trailer. And it's interesting, when he originally saw this cut, he was told, like, oh, we need to cut it down. It's not right. It's not going to work. And he's like, whoa. Like, let me just put some sound to it and we'll see how it works. And they ended up not changing the picture because the sound works so well. And he decided to go for a very expressionistic way with the sound. I mean, yeah, we could have had all this artillery pounding, but instead of focusing on, little unique details one at a time, and that's a lot of what sound can do. It's like creating that feeling, that mood. Walter Murch, who I don't know if any of you have heard of, he's a very famous sound designer from Apocalypse Now and is here in the Bay Area. He has a lot of fascinating things to say about the power of sound, but one of it is, people are so used to visuals, we're a visual creature, but sound was really the very first sense that any of us ever experienced in the womb before sight. So it has this feeling, and while visuals sneak in through the front door of your brain, through your eyes, sound can even sneak in through the back door and sort of play with your emotions without you being conscious of why you're feeling a certain way. So we found that was really important in this.
I wish we had better headphones for y'all to hear it right now, but yeah, I think you could still get.
And I apologize, you're not getting the stereo effect or the low end that we want you to hear, but just imagine.
So let's kind of just talk about the overview of the experience a little bit. It debuted at Tribeca, and it's currently set up in its own location in Austin. And so we transport these viewers, to the people who come to see it, to the front lines of World War I. And it's roughly 650 square feet in the experience. And you're actually in a trench that's modeled very closely after a World War I trench. And when you reach out and touch things, they're there. We had a really large focus on the tactile set and how that interplayed with the visuals. We wanted to make sure that the digital, the physical, and the sound were all blended together really harmoniously and seamlessly, so that we established this persistence of illusion. That's something we talked about a lot as we were producing it. We didn't want you to have anything that you could remind yourself, that you could reach out and not touch, that you could remind yourself wasn't real, that you weren't there. Anything that you interact with is there. We're not the first project to do that. You mentioned Carne before. That obviously had that in spades, and Hero and several others. But I think that what's really interesting about this is the level of detail in all of those sets. When you reach out and touch something, it's not just there's a block where there needs to be a block, but the texture is right and it feels right.
Yeah, I've never seen an experience that's built in this detail.
Yeah,
it's incredible. The sandbags, the corrugated metal, everything. What you see is what you feel.
So this next video I'm gonna play just kind of cuts back and forth between the digital experience and the physical, so that you can kind of see what we're talking about. So when we talk about the details on the physical set, I think that I really like this this image of holding up the rat and testing its placement. All of these different physical pieces were installed and then tested, and back and forth between the headset and the physical, and making sure that not only was it where it needed to be, but that the experience of touching it was actually paying off on what you wanted from the experience. So, we had dangling arms and a periscope that you could interact with, and the sandbags all over the place, and the corrugated boards, and even the duck boards that you were walking on were elevated up on a little bit of foam, so that as you stepped on it, there was a give to it, like you were stepping on boards laid down on mud. And we took that idea, and you start the experience in this hot air balloon. And we used the same concept of that foam to put that air balloon up on even more foam, so that as you step to one side of the basket to the other, it has a sway to it. And it was a really nice kind of low-tech solve for, I want this balloon to feel like it's actually swaying in the breeze. It just happens to be doing it from your own weight instead of us moving you around hydraulically. And those rats, I think, are one of the best examples of that. As we first had those rats installed, we reached out and touched them, and they felt like teddy bears. And that wasn't the reaction that we wanted people to have. So actually went in and sliced them open and took some of the stuffing out, and then put little rib cages in there and sewed them back up, and put some hot glue on them so that the coats felt nappy, because they just been running around in these trenches in the mud.
Ew, yuck.
Yeah. So when you reach out and touch these rats, it's like, not only are you at first you're like, oh, holy cow, they actually put the rats there. But then you feel them and you're like, oh my gosh, you have this really, really strong visceral reaction that you want to step back, and that level of detail just carried through the entire experience.
Yeah, and audio is obviously a huge part of that. Our team had to match the great attention to detail that they were doing on the visual side and the physical side. It was very important. So getting into a little bit of the research, Dan Carlin definitely took the lead on this and provided us with a lot of material to dive into and to look at, from old photographs, paintings, things like that. His podcast was actually a great resource. So as far as the location of where this is supposed to take place, this was the Battle of Passchendaele, 1917, Belgium, which is fairly late into World War I. And I didn't learn a tremendous World War I in school, so it was great, like sort of diving into this and realizing that World War I was a huge shift in technology. That battles had not really been fought this way. It was the first time that machine guns were really used a lot in a war. Tanks came into effect, later on in the war. Airplanes, obviously, and barbed wire, believe it or not, caused significant deaths. So that was a new weapon. And Dan always talks about, things are bad, but it can always get worse. So yeah, one thing that Dan kept harping on is he wanted for the people going through this experience to experience drum fire. And what is drum fire? It was this horrific amount of explosions and sounds that would happen that in a large part would drive people crazy. You hear about shell shock. Shell shock was a term that came out of World War I because there were these soldiers that had experienced just like day after day, week after week, months after months, being in the same trench, living, sometimes next to their, buddy who's a dead soldier next to them. And this drum fire was, cannons on the other side, like the Germans would shoot their howitzers and cannons over, and the aiming was not great. But in order to sort of take that in effect, they would fire a lot of them all at once. So it's explosion after explosion after explosion in quick succession. And we don't have any recordings of those because there were not great recording technology during that time frame. So in a lot of cases, we had to take, people that like soldiers, their first count, what they would say firsthand of what it sounded like and why it would make them feel like they were going crazy.
Yeah, I think that was a really interesting challenge from my point of view when you were talking about that before. The thought that you were going in and listening to what people were saying about their experience, and not just what did it sound like, but what did I feel because of what it sounded like and what I was going through, and then finding ways to translate that into the sound and the experience, but also the emotions that you're trying to instill in people as they're going through it and they're hearing it.
Definitely. And then it's like, okay, someone's going to go into this experience and like, you have to take into account, what are they going to expect? They have a certain sense of what they think war is going to be like. So yes, we want to be as accurate as possible, but we also want to make sure that we're also catering to people who think like, okay, I've seen a bunch of war movies and this is what I think it sounds like. And also I play a bunch of video games of warfare. So we kind of had to like balance between, reality and then cinematic war and also, video game war, and sort of bring all those things together with the sounds of explosions and all those things. You can kind of see here, some of the experience with the soldiers going up over the wall. And one thing you'll also notice too is, we're trying to create this illusion that this is a very long trench that goes miles and miles long, and there's, warfare happening behind you and ahead of you. You're actually not in a very big space, but we make it seem like it's huge from both a visual and a sound standpoint.
Yeah, that was really important, and we thought about that a lot as we were kind of laying out the physical design. And so the way that we were able to approach that, and that we kind of had to approach it, was to take it in layers, right? So we started. You can kind of see us in the upper left hand here, taping off a space, so that we could really easily, really quickly iterate on what's the amount of space that I'm walking through. And then we went from tape to cardboard. So we set up all of these giant cardboard walls. Brandon, our director, he's a master with cardboard. It's kind of crazy what he can do. And we use that process a lot with VR experiences, especially when we're using a physical space, where we want to, as quickly as possible, get to the heart of what's important and what's working, and see it played out in the space around you. So we'll mock things up with cardboard a lot. Then we moved into plywood and setting up the plywood system. And then once all of that was kind of down and we were happy with the flow of it, then we put the final finishes on it. And we worked with a great group called the Bender Brothers, built by Bender. And they came in and helped us iterate on this grid system so that we could quickly pack this up and roll it out and install it places. I'll play a little time lapse here, kind of going through all of the different steps. So we wanted to iterate a lot on the pathway that you go through. We knew that we wanted different stages and different sections for a couple of reasons. One was throughput was really important, and we wanted to set something up where there were different stages in the experience where we could start somebody off, and then once they were through a certain number of gates, start the next person behind them, and not have to be one person at a time through the experience. And this is kind of how we were able to achieve that. Talking about some of the hardware on this. So this was an interesting and ambitious project for the hardware that we were using. So we decided to go with the wireless Vive system, which came out in the middle of us of the production on this. You actually might have seen in a previous slide, we had a backpack PC on, which was really cumbersome, and we wanted to make it a lot easier for people to onboard and get into the experience. So we ended up with this final set of hardware where you're wearing a little sling that you put on. It's got the wireless receiver in it. You've got a battery pack. You've got a headphones receiver, and then the Vive Pro and some headphones. We had a lot of interesting challenges working with this system. It was our first time using the Vive wireless system, and it's very much a line of sight system. There's a little bit of give, but it doesn't want to go through walls. It certainly doesn't want to go through plywood. So the way we ended up having to solve that was bolting the PCs to the top of the trench, and actually on a shelf that was a few feet above the top of the trench, so that the antenna for the wireless system could point back down into the trench and see all of the different spaces. Which, we wanted to have this bunker experience. And so we had to get up high enough that we could come down and people could see it. That was the only place we ended up having a spot that cut out. If you kind of got down into the bunker and up against a wall, you could make it cut out. But it was fun.
And both Flight School and Madison Wells were really great in letting us at Skywalker help pick which headphones we were going to use. And we actually, tested a lot. We spent probably 2 months deciding which headphones to use, because this had to be an experience where people could hear the full fidelity of what at least we thought World War I sounded like, to really give that low end feeling and all that. So we ended up with the Fostex closed back audiophile headphones, the TH -X00. They're the ones that you can see with sort of the wood grain on the side. And while those are great headphones, we still weren't quite feeling the explosions and all those things. So we were able to at least we got involved early enough in the project that we were able to tell Flight School, hey, is our way to build these transducers into the floor of the experience, which give you a visceral feeling that they're timed with a lot of the explosions. You're feeling the low end through your feet, so it's tricking your brain that there's a massive subwoofer in the room, or you're really there and feeling that stuff. So there were these I think it was 4 transducers that were put into the experience, and they were discrete channels and floor zones, and they didn't just rumble. We were actually able to send specific audio to them in those frequencies, so we could really shape them to work with what you're hearing in the headphones.
Yeah, we frustrated a lot of animators in our studios. We had those set up and testing right next to where they were working.
And speaking of that, one thing that I came across, we were at Skywalker, and while we didn't have the physical space, we were able to sort of map out on the floor and walk through this experience and test it. I would go into the bunker section, and suddenly my eyes were in the ceiling. It was like, wait a second, like this isn't great. Like this totally takes me out of the experience.
Yeah, I never saw that.
You didn't? Why not?
No.
Oh, because I'm this tall and you're that tall, so
makes a difference. You gotta test things.
Yeah, Bill told me, because he had been down at Flight School, was like, oh yeah, all those guys are like under 6 feet. So this is definitely a valid concern. And so we were able to put that in, and they were able to raise up virtually the ceiling of the bunker. And we'll show you a little bit of the bunker scene now.
Yeah, thankfully that was easy enough to adjust.
These artillery strikes drove people insane. The shockwaves may have literally shattered their nerves. Remember something. I don't care how bad it seems. On the Western Front of the First World War, Things can always get worse. They can always get much, much worse.
So in that moment there, you were sort of at the tail end of the bunker hearing Dan's voice, which is obviously leading the experience and very important. But then after the series of drum fire, you've really been pummeled with the sound. We got into that more stylized section of like hearing the blood flowing and your heart beating for the person experiencing it. And then back out into like sort of the final section of the experience. Sound is so important. I keep harping on that, but that's what really sort of sells this whole experience. And part of the thing that was nice about this is this is not a long experience. It's maybe 8 to 10 minutes, maybe a little bit longer.
Yeah, it's kind of, it depends on how quickly you want to go through it. I think most people are closer to 15.
Okay, but that's like 15 minutes. It's not, we can really have the intensity ratcheted way up. Unlike if this was a much longer experience, somebody just couldn't deal with that much intensity. So when you're in the trench, there's explosions and shouting, and you're hearing all this stuff. Instead of like in a movie where it's like, okay, we're quiet and we're going to be loud here and we're going to be loud here and then loud later on. It was like, okay, we're going to be, it starts off pretty quiet, but then it's going to be really loud. Let's find a couple moments where we can duck out and be quiet, which was a nice change of pace. And the other great thing about this experience is, we didn't have any music to contend with. It was really just Dan's voice and the sound effects and the other audio. The one thing that I brought to this experience, which the other guys coming from VR and video games didn't have, was, in cinema, we were often dealing with, Foley teams, which, they, you deal with that in video games to some degree, but I was experienced with how to make sure that we get all the character movements for the soldiers coming out of the trench. We're hearing all their gear, we're hearing their body falls and all those things that are very specific. And then also Loop Group, we hired a professional set of actors to come in who could do convincing English accents, who could also shout at the top of their lungs and not lose their voice after 3 takes. So we got different people to do voices for both the English soldiers and then later on some of the German soldiers that you see in the distance. And then it's like, how do you put all that stuff together and how do you make it work? With Damien's help, we set up a lot of systems early on to do things like you're coming down in the balloon and we're hearing thunder, and that thunder gradually transitions into artillery explosions. And that was pretty cool and interesting, and randomizing wind and then setting up systems to like launch. You're hearing the launch of, the howitzers and the artillery and coming over your head. And, that was kind of great to sort of initially get set up. But as we progressed and kept adding more layers, a lot of that stuff sort of ended up pushing to the background. And we were focused on, really what you're seeing. And also, creating the illusion of hearing the soldiers around you that you don't see. And then how do you contend with that with Dan's voice? Because Dan's voice had to be paramount. So we created a lot of ducking systems. So when his voice came up, it would sort of lower other things to some degree without being too obvious to the user what was happening, to let his narration be king. And then finding those moments to get more stylized.
Yeah, I think this is the ring out section here.
Yeah, so we're going to start up kind of right where we ended before, coming out of the bunker and coming around the corner and seeing this tank and getting stylized again.
Yeah, the intensity just keeps building throughout the whole thing.
Absolutely.
So, one of the things that you were talking about that I think is a really important consideration is how we make the space feel bigger. And, you did a lot on the audio side to do that. And then there was a lot in the game design as well. And one of the things that we did was you start off in this void and you hear Dan's narration, and it's giving you this threshold moment, this transition to go, okay, I'm coming from wherever I was, I'm stepping into this space, and we're giving you a moment to get acclimated. And then there's this explosion, and you're invited to step into the fire. And so you take a couple of steps and you go from being in this very large open void, and then you're into a hot air balloon all of a sudden. And so that's a confined space, but even though we physically have you in a very small space, we're moving the camera as you move along. So it feels like you're traversing this long area. And one of the things we had to do was we found as we were testing this that people in the balloon wanted to just stare at this map board that we had. So we had to actually get overt with the statement, hey, look around, see what's going on around you, get a sense of where you are.
This all happens before you get into the trench.
Right. And this is kind of setting everything up, and you feel like you're just up above the clouds, but you start to realize you're descending into this kind of hellscape. And so we looked for all of these different moments to move you through the space. You'll step down the trench, and then you'll encounter a block section that you can't physically go any further down. But as you look, the sight continues down, and you can see people going up over the edge and getting mowed down. And you can turn around, and there's a periscope that there's a flare that goes over, and it lights up the periscope. And so that lighting contrast draws your eye to it, and you're invited to come look at that periscope and see that, yes, you can see up over the edge of the trench, and you can see what's happening. And then you go through this bunker moment. So again, it's a small confined space. You feel like you're going to get some relief when you step in there, but instead you start experiencing this drum fire, and you're getting rattled, and it finally opens up, and you're allowed down the back hallway. And down that back hall of the trench, it's where the rain starts, and where we start to really lean in on Dan's statement that it can always get worse. And so now the mud is really prevalent, and the walls of the trench are falling down, and you can see out over the battlefield until the final shell finally falls, and you're kind of raising up above it. So we looked for a lot of ways to, 650 square feet to somebody who's been designing a tethered VR experience is a incredibly luxurious amount of space, but it's not adequate for the expanse of World War I. And so we had to find all of these different areas, both in sound and in the physical production, to find ways to extend the space that you're in.
So the key takeaways?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got any key takeaways?
Absolutely. High quality headphones make a huge difference. It's easier for us to make content for really great headphones instead of like spending a lot of time trying to sort of optimize it for inferior headphones. So I can't say that enough. So you get what you pay for. Don't underestimate the power of sound, and it's never too early to get sound involved. Absolutely. And one thing that's key takeaway for me too is, like, I like to say we work on sound for movies, is there's always like a pencils down time. Okay, we make creative decisions, and then there's time where it's like pencils down on the test. Well, for this kind of thing, everybody can't have the same deadline. You can't have the visuals, the physical, the audio all have the same deadline, because suddenly it's like, we're tweaking things, and then something else happens, and now our sound doesn't match the visual. So try to please build in time for your audio team to kind of be the last one standing and tweak things and make sure that it's right for the user. And then one also thing that they were able to do at the Austin build out is to really sort of set up a way to go into the experience very graciously, and then come out where you're really setting up the people to have this experience. So you walk into this, sort of mock recruiting office, and you're hearing a loop of people, working and typing on typewriters, and you're hearing a Victrola, and you're hearing Dan talk a little bit in the corner. So you're setting that mood to get people into this really intense experience. And then it's important to have audio as you come out of it too, to sort of get people back into the real world. You don't want to just like throw these headphones on, have this intense experience, and then just sort of like kick them out the door.
Yeah, those thresholds are so important. We think a lot about what the onboarding experience is and what the offboarding experience is, and how you take people on these layers deeper and deeper into the story and into the experience. And then, I think from our point of view, one of the things that we found was a really important takeaway was this idea of working in layers and in stages and starting as flexible as you can and using that to test it, to constantly test, send people through it, be considerate of the actual end user who's going through it and what their experience is. And then throughput considerations. How can you find ways to build in the chance to get more people into it? So go to warremains.com to check out more. It's currently installed in Austin, and hopefully there will be some more announcements soon. Ethan shrugs. So we've got, I think, 5 minutes left for some questions, and then we'll be over at the wrap table if you want to follow up with us afterwards.
Yeah, I have a question. I think what you've done is absolutely brilliant and utterly terrifying, even in 2D. I think it's a tremendous anti-war tool, and I really envision it being used that way. But I'm wondering, with all the Civil War addicts, people who travel to Civil War battlefields, if you've thought of doing Gettysburg or anything like that.
Yeah, we've thought about a lot of different things. And so one of the things from Dan's point of view that was important at the beginning is that it's neither pro-war nor anti-war. We weren't trying to make a statement. We were trying to just show people the experience and the craziness of it, and then you're invited to draw your own conclusions. I think a lot of people will draw that conclusion. But yeah, there are a lot of different places that we could take this. I think it shows the power of VR as an educational tool.
It's a way to step into history.
Right. Thank you.
Hi. So my question is, did you have situations where people were freaking out because of how intense the experience
Absolutely.
is, and how were you trying to mitigate it in the design, or were you even trying to mitigate it?
Well, there's one thing that I neglected to mention as far as the setup. The way that we were able to set up the audio for this is it was separate. While it was synced with the visuals, it was a separate feed. So if somebody crouched down and cowered in the corner because they were so freaked out, the audio would not drop out. The audio would continue. And there's actually a way for an operator who's watching to tap into that audio feed with a microphone and make sure somebody's okay. So that was a really important experience to make sure, because everybody's going to experience this in a different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it you can always take the headset off and walk away, right? So that's one of the important things about making sure that there's a way, if somebody needs to go backwards through the physical space to get out. We had paths set up for that.
And is that a part of the introduction as well, when you bring people into the experience, like this, like you can do this, it's okay? Is that actually a part of the procedure? I'm just
it was Ethan's nodding yes. I don't remember setting that up, but yeah, I mean, we definitely wanted to be cognizant of people. We didn't want this to be a trigger for PTSD or anything like that. So we definitely wanted people to be able to get out of it.
Hey there. I got to experience this at
awesome
at Tribeca.
Sweet.
And it was extraordinary. And interestingly, I had an opportunity to recount the experience to someone just a couple days ago. And I said, wow, it was interesting. I'm in the trenches. I feel the fans blowing. And I was trying to explain how from the outside, it just doesn't look like, well, it looks like a pile of stuff. But when you're inside, this is transformed, seeing the rosary in front of you and being able to touch it, being trapped in this room. But at the same time, I find myself pushing the boundaries of the system, looking up over. There's a certain kind of fascination rather than horror. But I find myself appreciating getting, well, it's a little closer is better than none at all. And the person I was talking to, who hasn't seen the experience, he countered that a little bit. He said, I was reading about a Holocaust museum where they used to try to simulate the experience of being put in a train car by herding all the guests into the elevator together and making them do that. And they received pushback from survivors who said, you can't really recreate it. And they had some qualms about going halfway without going all the way. So we can't totally step into history. And I'm just curious, is it good to get closer, or does it help us, because we can't get all the way there, is it sort of sanitizing what can't really be understood fully? And I mean it more as a discussion. I hope I'm not sounding critical, because it was an amazing experience. And yet looking at photographs of World War I is horrifying. We're in this kind of middle space. And I'm just
Right.
curious as to your impressions.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's a lot of where Dan was coming from and wanting to set this up. And his desire was very much, we can't get you all the way there, right? We don't have a time machine and we're never going to have one. But can we get one step closer? Can we get one degree closer to giving you the sense of what it might have been like to be there? And that was the goal of this. And I do think that it was closer than some of the other ways that we can study about it.
Well, in a lot of ways too, it just like starts the conversation for people to go through this experience and then go from there. You know, maybe it inspires them to learn more about World War I and do research, or you know, just start talking about, you know, why did this, you know, war even happen. So I think it's a good thing, even though we can't get all the way there.
Yeah,
I'm going to follow up with my friend with that response.
yeah.
Okay.
This discussion is
Great.
exactly the goal. So
Well, we'll be in the back there to continue any questions. So please come say hi.
thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.